them on the bottom. And so now you can see there's holes at the bottom of our bin. And now what we have to do is stack it inside the first bin, and we can start piling up our bedding for our worms. Alright, so we've stacked our two bins into each other. The first bin has the holes drilled at the bottom, as you can see. And now we're ready to start our bedding for our worms. And what's great is that when you have your own worm bin, you create a relationship with the food that you're giving them and the soil that you're getting from them. So it's kind of nice to think of their bedding as like your way of tucking them in so that they can live really long life and produce a lot of good castings for you. So what I have here is just a piece of cardboard. You can get cardboard anywhere, you can find it. You can shred it too if you wanted to. I'm just going to leave it as this big plank, and I'm just going to shove it towards the bottom here. And what that will do is it'll help create like a sponge layer for any excess moisture. If it falls through, it won't just like leach right into your bottom bin. It'll kind of stay so that your bed can be nice and damp and humid for the worms, because they don't want to get too dried out, but they also don't want to stay too wet. So other materials I have today for our bedding include some shredded paper, which you can shred at home. You can also use newspaper that you can shred on site. I have this nice catcher system. It's just a planter container that you get from like the Lowe's store or Green Thumb that comes with a lot of plants in there. I like to use it to catch my worms, so when I place it inside, it kind of wedges nicely where it doesn't hit the bottom right away. So it just creates an easier space for you to work with when you're ready to maybe harvest your tea or something. Your worm tea, you can take it out without having a big old mess. So I like to have that ready. And before I start anything else, I'm going to put just a couple of newspapers at the bottom here. And again, this is just helping to create a nice bed. It's a spongy layer so that any excess moisture can stay and your worms will be living in a nice place. I'm ready to add some soil because I want to create a home for them that they already are used to and that they already love. Worms live in the soil, and usually the soil temperatures are around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And so we want to make sure that this bin stays cool enough in a shady spot and it doesn't get too hot. I'm also going to add some soil because they love the soil. So this is compost that I've gotten that is nice and dark, and the darker it is and the more moist it usually is, the damper it is. So you want it to be this nice rich dark chocolate color. And if you don't have any access to compost at home to start your bin, you can use any kind of dirt you find outside that you can get wet, or any kind of sticks or rocks that mimic the soil floor, the forest floor. You just spread a bunch around, maybe just about an inch layer or two. In landfills, you don't have as much dirt and composite layering with leaves falling from trees, so the food doesn't break down as well in landfills, which is why when you start a worm composting bin at home, you can really make a big impact and help with climate change and food waste, because a lot of food we grow we end up throwing away, which we don't really want to do if the worms can eat it. So that looks good to me. Enough that you can dig down and you can see the bottom, but enough where the worms can kind of wiggle around without it being too shallow. And I like to call worms dolphins of the dirt. So now we're ready to add some worms and add some food scraps. Here I just got some worms to add from the first bin that I will add to this bin. And I just want you guys to look up close. There's all different sized worms because they're all different ages. Worms reproduce really fast, and so you might find baby worms in here that are just getting their life started, and then some big hunk of worms that are the big chiefs around here, the big broncos. Now we can add them in. So I like to scatter them around. Again, it's good to make them exercise because otherwise they'll just be lazy fat worms that you just feed all day. You want them to move around. So now that we got worms in here, I know people are kind of squirmish with worms, but I think they're really cool. So now we'll feed them. So I have some scraps. These are just some This is a little too big, but these are from flowers that I harvested, some calendula flowers, but they can eat them. So again, you're just mimicking nature. So what would nature have that worms would eat, that would break down? Anything that ends up on the floor is fair game for your worms. So I'm gonna just feed one side. And worms really love leafy greens. They don't love citrus. So if you have citrus, I recommend throwing it in a different bin for either your compost pile or your landfill. You can also make them into recipes too, but no citrus, no onions. They love eggshells and they love coffee grounds. And I like to, if they're really big chunks, like really long chunks or thick, I'll cut them up so that they're a little bit smaller, just so that they can break down a little bit quicker, because it might just be in here a long time if it's really big. And so how I want to finish off our feeding hour with the worms is to cover them in a nice blanket of bedding. So I'm going to use our pile of shredded paper. Again, this is paper that you can make at home with any mail that you don't want. And you'll just make a nice thick bedding, and this keeps the heat in so that their temperature is regulated. It also helps regulate the humidity so it doesn't get too dry in there. And next time you feed them, we'll feed this side so that you'll notice in about a couple days, if you were to lift this up, all the food that we fed them would be gone, because they recycled it into nutrients for our soil. Once they make their castings, I want to show you how we would collect them. Alright, so this bin I have, and there's worms in this planter container that I showed you when we set up, but I don't need to take them out today, so I'm just going to take out this big bin and see what we have underneath. If you wanted to collect the castings, that's the physical substrate that you get, like it looks like really dark soil. You should use it from here. If you want to collect the worm tea, which is the liquid food that comes out of the castings, you would lift it up and then see all that juice at the bottom. That's really nutrient-rich biology that you can feed to your plants. So that's something that you could dilute and feed like a food to your soil. Then you would just start again. Happy worms, happy life.